Radio Retro Future.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Bonsert of Radio Retro Future, and today I wanted to start working on the next video in our Association of Ishtar series, which I will launch together with our upcoming Kickstarter, Journey to Elysium. We recently reached 100 followers, so I'm really happy about that. It's not the projected 150 I had hoped for, but it is what it is. Regardless, I'm very grateful to everyone who is following us and who wants to support us in the coming campaign. As I said, all the money currently goes to our illustrators to really bring our world to life. Regarding the next video is that they will also include new original art specially made for the videos. This is something I hope to continue. However, I cannot do so without your support. And with no further ado, yesterday I had a wonderful stream. I'm following this Kickstarter accelerator by Russell Nolte, and he has these amazing guests that they have like in these Zoom meetings. And yesterday I had the pleasure of meeting T. Taylor, who has written a book called Seven Figure Fiction. And one of the things that she talks about a lot are the next two words that I really want to talk about. Now, these are things that I've thought about, but really it's funny how language can really change, how rewire your brain and how you look at things. So I hope that after you seeing this video, you too reevaluate your fiction and your world. And with those terms, we're going to be talking about universal fantasy in one end and butter at the other. Now, what is universal fantasy? Is this some type of new genre? No, it is not a genre term. It's actually more of a reference to the core of every book, every fictional book, but in some regards also non-fiction. I'm not sure if it actually can apply to non-fiction, but we'll see. But in fiction, it basically means what is the most important thing your book is about. Let's for example say she used Beauty and the Beast as a very good example, which is the universal fantasy of the fixer-upper, of a woman getting to fix this completely dysfunctional man who literally became into a beast, and at the end, of course, everything is going to be alright and he turns human again and they live happily ever after. For let's say Sword and Sorcery, it's the idea of being this super powerful adventurer who with his friends fights all these villains and monsters and going Dungeons and Dragons, going down with your friends into a dungeon with your while being this powerful badass character or mage or warrior. Exploring new worlds is a universal fantasy. Being a wizard is a universal fantasy. Going to wizard school can be a universal fantasy. So this is really what is the fantasy that your reader, your viewer, your listener is gonna go through. And so you could go on and on and on. Now that brings me of course to what is the universal fantasy of steampunk, because that's my genre for those who are new to my show, but we'll talk about it afterward. Butter, what is it? And I love this term because I'm already starting to use this term in my head to describe what I'm writing at the very moment. Butter is essentially the world building, broadly speaking. Now, I have a bit of a different definition of world building than most. Well, most people think of world building, making maps, designing vehicles, drawing art. That I personally use the word world design for that. I actually made a video on that, on world building, so go check that out if you want more of a detailed approach to what I think is world design and what is actual world building. But it's relevant here because world building to me is really how your characters interact with the world and how the world is interwoven into the greater narrative and the themes of a story. So drawing a map for me is like the world design part, but it doesn't really necessarily add anything to the story. It's like an aid to the reader, like, oh, this is how I imagine my world, and this is where this place is located, and this is where that place is located, but the map in itself doesn't really add anything, except butter. Okay, here, well, so what is butter then? In my workshop, I talk about sentence writing. For me, good sentence construction is the core of all world building. If you cannot write a proper sentence, you cannot world build. For me, that's how I look at it. And there I make a distinction between a subject of the sentence, which is a character doing something. Every sentence is a character doing something. Every sentence is essentially a panel in a comic book or a scene in a movie. And it can be like the character kicks in a door. The character is walking across a sidewalk. A character is picking up a glass. A character is picking up a mug. Right? So when you describe a house, for example, you can say, there is a house in the fields. Now, that's not a wrong sentence at all. It's a statement. But that's it. It's just a statement. There is a house standing in a field. Like, the house has no agency, it doesn't do anything, it just exists. That's not gripping anyone. However, you can say, John observes the house in the field. Now you have a character doing something. Now it's like John is looking at a house standing in the field. Now the subject is John doing something. And yet you have the statement that the house is standing in the field. Now that latter part is the butter of the sentence. This is the time where we start to add butter. And that is the world building, what brings the world to life. We can make it, for example, make the house more interesting by saying, well, John observes the house in the field with 5 radar dishes on the roof. And that's like, oh, that little bit of butter, those 5 radar dishes, like the readers go, oh, why does the house have like 5 radar dishes on the roof? Right, that's that little bit of butter. And then you spread it out. You know, when John moves closer to the house, he notices there's this massive power generator beside it. When John moves even closer, he sees that the door is like completely barred with metal and there's bars in front of the windows. So we have like the simple action of John moving closer to the house, and then we have the butter, like, oh, there's all these security elements added to the house. And we kind of like gradually add butter to mundane actions, and that is also what I'm talking about when turning reading into an experience. It's that inclusion of butter. You can rub as much butter on any scene that you want. However, you gotta realize that you can add too much butter to anything. Now, I did not use these terms, but like I said, I'm now using it to my own fiction. That's why I'm so enthused about it. And there's this scene in, for example, Bound for the Sticks, which is my second novel, which is also the book I'm most proud of, so you can buy it without reading book 1, so go ahead and order that during our next Kickstarter, inclusion with the Arcology Companion, which is a big stick of butter, now I'm thinking about it. I mean, yes, there is action in there, there are universal fantasies in there, but if you were like, wow, I Bound for the Sticks, but I'd like it to be a little bit more greasy, you know, then you read the Arcology Companion, then like you've got this big fat hamburger in your hands all of a sudden. That's kind of like the difference. That's why I love this butter metaphor. However, there's also something that, what if your audience does not like butter, right? Especially when you're talking about genre fiction, let's say science fiction or steampunk in that matter. In particular, some things like steampunk. You know, it's not butter but margarine. Now, there are people in my audience say, but I love margarine. Well, yeah, I don't mind margarine either, but, you know, it's a particular state. I should have said Marmite. Excuse me, I meant Marmite. So instead of butter, you're adding Marmite. And that is especially something that you're doing in steampunk. It's a refined taste. Doesn't mean you can have steampunk with a lot of butter. There's also going to be a lot of Marmite in there. And that is something that people will like or not like. That's just the nature of the beast. When you look at your fiction, you know, look at your sentences in particular. You know, also in combination with what I just told you about world building, is that do your sentences have enough butter, or do they have too much? Are they too greasy? Like where I have this scene where the character arrives in a new world, so there's a lot of butter there at the start to explain like this new world that's not like Earth. that she left behind. It's a new world. But I don't want to bombard the reader with like this big stick of butter right away. Spread it out, you know, so the reader starts following the trail of butter through the hallways as he progresses into this new world, and then sees the end of the tunnel. Like there's all kinds of strange noises and all kinds of hints of what might be beyond there, so she runs out there to see what's there, and then you get like this big greasy pile of warm butter, you know, roasting with a bit of gravy in there as well. And some Marmite, of course, because it's genre writing. So there's gonna be Marmite involved at some points. It's just a dumb metaphor, but I love it. And why I mention this in particular, because I said I wanted to make a video on steampunk warfare. That's also kind of comes back to the universal fantasy. You know, if you want to write a book on warfare, you know, what is the universal fantasy? Let's say you're writing a book on World War II. Okay, what is the universal fantasy of my book? Joining the guys of the 101st Airborne as they enter Normandy. Have that experience, that universal fantasy of going along with these soldiers and experience what they experience from the safety of your living room. I mean, universal fantasy don't have to be that specific, but you've got to have like a clear core, something you can put on the back of your book. Like the first thing on your book should say, I should rewrite the backs of my book, is that like, boom, this is the universal fantasy of my book. This is what you can expect, and then you start writing down the butter. And then this is the flavors of butter. You're gonna have some Marmite, you're gonna have some coconut butter, you're gonna have some margarine. And with that, let's see, so that brings me kind of like, what is the universal fantasy of steampunk then? Well, that's a hard question again, is because steampunk is a very specific niche genre. Now, fantasy with a steampunk skin, which is the universal fantasy of, well, it's a fantasy world with mages and orcs and all that stuff, but everyone looks like they're Victorians or factory laborers from the 19th century, right? That's kind of that's like you have like your universal fantasy, like this is a fantasy story about orcs and goblins and factories, and on the other, your butter is the steampunk aesthetic. So the aesthetic is mostly the flavor of butter, right? For steampunk, I mean, we're talking about like a niche, an alternate history genre with a heavy emphasis on science fiction elements. So it's gonna be, well, you're gonna be living in the Victorian era, but with ray guns. So you're gonna have, you know, you gotta clarify the Marmite. And when you say, well, is this Marmite too salty? Maybe I should add some butter there to reach a bigger audience. That's one of those bigger, the questions you've got to ask yourself. With steampunk and other niche genres, you're just gonna have a lot of Marmite, and not everyone likes Marmite. And then you have to ask yourself, like, who am I writing this for? Am I writing this for my particular core audience, for my super fans, or am I writing this for a particular type, for a broad audience? And this also plays into what Russell Nolte dubbed the author ecosystem, which is something that I'll discuss in the writing workshop as well. I don't feel qualified enough to talk about it on video. However, it's very interesting. And one of the ecosystems that they use is, for example, the desert, which are people that constantly follow trends, right? They're nomads going through a desert landscape, always chasing the trends. So what is hot right now? That is what I'm gonna write, like hitting like the top 6 topics of books at the moment. So for example, if you wrote books in 2010, you'd be writing about vampires and werewolves and love triangles, because, you know, that's the universal fantasy that was popular at the time. See how this terminology works. But yeah, the problem is that in 2020, people are done with the vampire werewolf love triangle. The deserts are gonna have like this big backlog of books that do not sell anymore, right? To name but an example. So I think there are like 4 or 5, I think, from the top of my head. But like I said, I do not feel qualified enough to talk about that, because that's, you know, until I make sales, you know, actual sales on places like Amazon, and find my audience in so much media formats. But yeah, and hopefully that can pay off once it catches on. And I think that in particular, the Association of Ishtar does have that potential. Of course, I need to nail down for myself, I'm speaking for myself now, nail down that universal fantasy, which is, at one end, you know, it's a multiverse, so there are all these threats coming in from other worlds. So universal fantasy would be like you're a secret agent and countering all these alien invasions, for the lack of a better term. However, another universal fantasy is really like, what if all these technologies from other worlds pour into this world? But that is more of a flavor, and that's the interesting thing, and why I find this is so important, because now that sounds like a butter thing to me, you know, that what if question. I really need to focus, like, what is the universal fantasy of the Association of Ishtar? And it right now, and I'm glad I've gone into this direction, but I'm now really thinking about, should I be going in this direction, is really this fighting aliens thing using otherworldly technologies. Like, we're doing the Casket Girls, which is all about fighting, you know, this alien threat. They go on missions fighting aliens, and, you know, they grow, their unit is changing, the world is changing as they move along. There is the universal fantasy of fighting aliens, and then there's the butter of like all this military intrigue and political intrigue on the sides, and of course the life, or the prison life of a penal trooper. I don't want to ramble on too much. I think I'm gonna leave it here. But what I want you to take away from this is that you really have to think about, like, okay, what is the universal fantasy of what I'm writing? Where's the butter? Where's the Marmite? Where do I spread the butter thin, and where do I throw in a big stick of butter, you know, for that wow moment that the reader's like, whoa, you know. So that's kind of like what I hope you take away from it. That's what I took away from it. So yeah, that book is Seven Figure Fiction by T. Taylor. It helped me a lot. I'll include it in my workshops from now on as well. And with that said, ladies and gentlemen, if you have not already, please support our upcoming Kickstarter. We will include writing workshops as well, because, like I said, we are working on games. I hope to have a conversation with my game developer today, in fact. And yeah, there are other developments afoot as well. So yeah, join me on that adventure. And with that said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna bid you adieu, and as always, make things your way. Good night.